Now it is time again for Martin Nilsson. I give him no further introduction than the memory master, so a warm hand.
Thank you. So we will just jump right into demonstrating what it is that I'm doing instead of talking about how to do it and when to do it and why you should do it. There will be time for that afterwards. But first, I just want to share with you what goes on inside my head while I'm doing the things that I do. So we're gonna go to the movies together, and this is here in Stockholm, even though I have slightly altered the look at the movie place, but it's up to you to imagine any kind of movie that you go to. So any kind of cinema that you are used to, imagine that. So this is outside of the cinema. It's evening time, and we're trying to meet our friends. Unfortunately, things are about to take a turn for the worse. So we meet our friends, and we're about to head inside, but then he appears, Vladimir Putin. He stops us in our tracks. We cannot move past him, and he's blocking the way. We have no option but trying to go to the left. No, it doesn't work. To the right, doesn't work. So one of our friends is armed with a can of maple syrup. So he throws the can of maple syrup towards Putin, and it hits him square in the face. And the sticky substance of the syrup kind of sticks to him and makes him move very slowly, which gives us the time we need to sweep by him and enter the cinema. Inside, we want to buy something to snack on during the movie, maybe some nice drink, and things are not easier in this room. So at this point, Mickey Mouse is the one that tries to sell us things, and while we say Coca-Cola, popcorn, chocolate, Mickey Mouse says, no, 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 no. You are only supposed to have water. What Mickey Mouse knows is that behind us is a large dragon, and the dragon is just unleashing a huge fireball, and thanks to Mickey's water, we can extinguish the flames, save ourselves, extinguish the flame on the ticket, and move past him into the next room. Thanks, Mickey. So here we have the usher, and we need to hand him the ticket. And this seems like kind of a small problem compared to Putin and fire-breathing dragons. But the usher is balancing the world's largest cup of coffee. It's so huge that this image doesn't really do it justice. If you have seen the movie Jurassic Park, you know that the water is supposed to go all the way up to the brim, and then it starts. Boom. It's a thud in the distance. Things start to move on the water, but it's not a crazy T-Rex or some other kind of dinosaur. It's actually a kangaroo. It takes a giant leap, lands square in the middle of the coffee cup, and we have water and coffee going everywhere. Stains, obviously, but we just throw the ticket to the usher and move on into the movie theater. At this point, it is as empty as you can see, so we don't really care about what it says on the ticket. We just sit down, and now we're going to have a nice time in front of the movie. Unfortunately, we take the only seat that was occupied. It was an old Indian chief, and tired of hundreds and hundreds of years of abuse, he is obviously very upset with us. And if it wasn't for Lionel Messi, who appears on the side, firing a wicked left shot, hitting the poor Indian chief in the temple, feathers are going everywhere, it's just a big mess, disaster. The news will report about this, of course, in the evening. But they continue to tumble outside, and we can finally sit down and watch the movie. But before the movie, there is a commercial, and this commercial is Kim Kardashian saying, if you want to look like her, be as successful as her, and as happy as her, you should eat algae. If you eat algae, you will be super successful in everything you do. And then the movie starts. In this case, it is quite an old movie. It's from 1984, I think. Karate Kid, the first one. Have you seen it? And in this movie, the young Daniel LaRusso is seeking the advice and help of the aging karate master, Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi decides, I will teach you karate. But what Daniel experiences is that karate is Mr. Miyagi language for housework. He polishes the car, he waxes the floor, and he paints the fence. And at one point, Daniel gets tired of just doing house chores, and he tells Mr. Miyagi, I came here to learn karate, and you're only making me do a lot of chores. I quit. And then, of course, Mr. Miyagi says, I have been teaching you karate. I took the abstract, the very hard-to-learn karate moves, and I made them into very concrete, very solid, easy-to-understand information. Wax on, wax off. And that is exactly what we've been doing for the last 5 minutes. But what have we actually been doing? Well, let's see if you recognize this list. This is a list of the 10 largest countries in the world, ranked in order. Russia, of course, is represented by Vladimir Putin, and Canada, that was the sticky maple syrup for the second part, and then China. That wasn't that good. Well, if you look to the right, you can see that the numbers doesn't really make sense, because 9.5 million is obviously less than 9.8 million. What was Mickey Mouse holding in his hand and giving us? Water. If we count the water with territory, we go out to neutral water, then the US is bigger. They have 2 big coastlines, they have islands, and China only has 1 big coastline. But if you count actual land mass, then China is bigger than the US. So the water that Mickey Mouse holds is the key to remember which order they should be in. Number 5 is Brazil. What does Brazil have to do with coffee? Does anyone know? It's the world's biggest producer of coffee. Some of you knew this, and then of course coffee is a good representation for Brazil. Otherwise, you just learned a new fact. And learning new facts, that is actually how memories are formed. We take something old, country of Brazil, and we connect it to something new, coffee. The next time you will think of coffee, you will automatically think of Brazil. And the next time you think of Brazil, you will automatically think of coffee. So we just formed a new memory. Australia, of course, the kangaroo. And then maybe some of you thought, hold on, India is not an Indian chief, and we should say North American, what is it called in English? Ursprungsbefolkning in Swedish. Native American, sorry, yes. So I exchanged this. I didn't show you this image. I actually showed you an image of Gandhi instead. Much better representation for India. The problem is, though, that when I've done this with students in Sweden, 87% of them, and that's almost 1,000 students that have been involved in this, 87% of them remembered India when I used this stereotypical image. When I used Gandhi, only 62% had a correct country the week after. So I think Gandhi is a better fact, it's a better image, but we lost 25% due to changing the image. And I think that is an important fact that you can also talk about and think about what that means. After that, we have Argentina. That's the country of Lionel Messi. And then number 9. Where is Kim Kardashian from? She's from Armenia, I think. But I actually used, do you know Borat, the movie Borat? Yeah. I used that, and some people said, no, I don't think that's a good representation, or I've never heard of that movie. So then one person came up to me and said, can't you just use Kardashian instead? And I said, why? Because it sounds the same. Kardashian, Kazakhstan, and then I thought, yeah, maybe not, but kind of. And you don't think Kardashian, Switzerland. So, I mean, Kardashian, Kazakhstan. It's similar, so it works. Algeria, I'm not saying that has anything to do with algae, or seaweed, which was in the picture, but it's easy to then remember Algeria. So like Karate Kid, we take the hard-to-grasp concepts, a land is pretty abstract information, and we make it into something that is easy to visualize, to memorize. And that is how I began, by reading a book that you could actually learn and remember everything. And I started to read this book, and they talked about how you could train your memory and you could memorize decks of cards, and it didn't really have anything to do with knowledge when I first started, but I was just intrigued that you could train your mind into doing these things. And this is actually how my kit looked when I started training. You have your headphones on, and then you buy this swimwear, and you drill a hole in each eye, not in each eye, but yeah, you get the picture. And that's because then you narrow your point of focus. I think the mathematician Euler said something about when he lost sight on one eye, he said that, now I have less distraction. And that is the point of those goggles. So I was doing this on the train, by the way. So it's not really a good social activity, I suppose. But that was to get started in the world of competitive memory sports, which it actually is. Maybe you should have padded walls around you when you're doing this. I don't know. But the first competition I went to was actually in a mall in Gothenburg. So imagine that you have to learn vast amounts of information in a mall, a chaotic setting with thousands of people running around. And then I realized, if I only can do this when I seal off my hearing, when I focus my vision, then there's no real point in learning this. So I actually started training without any artificial help, just using your mind, your eyes, thinking, hearing, whatever. And you can see the Tower of Pisa down below, and that is actually the solution to what I learned during this competition, that there are actually 4 stages involved in memorizing information. What we do, of course, taking the abstract to concrete things, is we use places. I talked about that when I memorized each name present here, and I made a counting error which made me end up in one of the rooms in the wrong location. But that is because I store all the images in places, just like we did at the movies. Also, we use images. Images are easy. I can close my eyes and I can see Putin, I can see the can of maple syrup. It's very powerful information that is also easy to remember. And we use this to tell stories. So the story of Putin getting a can of maple syrup is powerful for the mind, and it's easy to remember. And that brings on the last part, the association, because I need to connect the image of Putin to the country of Russia. I need to take the maple syrup and connect it to Canada. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's as easy as pie, even though it says Pisa. I was on a Swedish television show where kind of what I did yesterday. I took the train from my native town in Halmstad in the southern part of Sweden. It takes 4 hours to get to Stockholm, and I learned that day's newspaper from A to Z. So all the pages, all the information on a 4-hour train ride. And actually, I've been teaching you now exactly how to do it, so we can hand out newspapers and we can see how much you can remember, but we don't have 4 hours, unfortunately. But it is the same thing that we have been talking about. There is no bigger trick, there are not more things to learn than that. So then the next question is, okay, so was I born with a photographic memory? Can I just absorb information? And unfortunately, not. It is work. You have to learn how to learn. And I have been training students to do this now for 7 years, I think. And there is roughly 1,000 students that have passed this course over those years. And what we do is that we measure them during the first 10 weeks of training. So we have memory students, I call them, that we measure. It says vecka, but that should be week. Before they start, that's week 0, and then we measure them halfway, 5 weeks, and then after 10 weeks. Of course, the course is 1 full year, and they have data for that as well, but I think it's interesting to see how much you can improve in just 10 weeks, 2 lessons a week. We have a control group as well. And the control group, I don't measure them after 5 weeks because we don't anticipate any improvement by not doing anything for 5 weeks and then 10. So regular psychology students. But they are from the same program and equivalent. So we give them a task. We have a list of 72 random words. Words like hypothesis, illusion, banana, table, person. It could be anything. So some abstract, kind of hard words, some easy ones. But to get 1 point where it says 22, you need to remember that banana was word number 13, and you need to spell it correctly. If you have a spelling mistake, if you say bananas, you get 0. So without training, our students, for 20 minutes of study time, they scored 22. The control group was actually much better, 23. No, that is obviously kind of the same result, more down to random facts. And the control group actually did slightly worse. They had 22 as opposed to 23 after 10 weeks. That's to be expected. But how much can you improve by doing 2 lessons for 5 weeks? A number between 0 and 72. What do you think? How many correct answers do you think they gave as a mean in the group after 5 weeks? 50? 51. And after 10 weeks, we actually ran into a little problem, because after 10 weeks, what happened was that our students actually got them all right. So the researchers that were now covering this program, they said this is like a ceiling effect or a roof effect. So now we give them 100 words. And I can now say proudly that next year we will give them 150 words instead, because it's too easy. After 10 weeks of training, it's too easy to memorize 100 random words in 20 minutes. That's not me being a memory master. That's not even me being a memory master teacher. It's just the techniques themselves are so powerful that anyone can learn to do it. This is from a student evaluation. It's a lot of text. But I think the important takeaway from this is that the students who start this course, they don't have a superior memory from the beginning, but they take the information and they learn to take mundane things. I know from the first talk I heard with Amita this morning, she said that we are motivated for different things. The adolescent brain has to have motivation. We need to actually pick up on things, and if we're motivated, we can learn endless amounts of information. And what my students have learned after 1 year is that we have the power to transform the boring things into things that is actually something I want to think more about. Take the boring stuff and make it fun. At the end of the year, we have a project where all the students need to do something that they thought would be impossible 10 months prior. They need to amaze themselves. So some of them tell me, oh, I think I should learn all the countries in the world, all the flags and all the capitals. And then I say, of course, do you think that's impossible? No. And then they do something else. Here's a list of what they have been doing. They did learn that David Macmillan was the receiver of the Chemistry Prize in 2021. We had a student who learned all the Nobel Prize laureates in all the different categories. We have one student who was banned from the medical program school that she attended in the US after having this course, because they had a test to, you know, that like they do it in the Navy SEALs, they break you down then to build you up. So on the first day of education, they gave them a test, asking them to write all the bones in Latin and all the muscles in Latin, and she got 100% correct answers. That had never happened before, and they said, you can't go here because you're a cheater and you shouldn't be in education. Of course, then she told them about memory techniques and how she was doing it, and she was let back in the program. Criminal code, that's the entire criminal code, word for word. We had a student who won the, what do you call it, Juridik-SM in Swedish, the national championship in law, I suppose. And they used that to their advantage. And if you understand the 2,000 most common words in German, you can understand 83% of any normal, everyday talk. So that's a huge advantage. It took 2 weeks to learn 2,000 words. We had 5,000 decimals, yeah. You can see the rest. Here you can see Julia, by the way, writing down all the years. Do you recognize them if you're from Sweden? This is the Nilsson poem from the New Year's Eve thing at Skansen. And it was held every year from 1895, and it's still an ongoing tradition, even though it was cancelled due to bad weather in 1896, as you can see. She wrote down everyone who held the speech, and she also knew the poem with its different variations, word for word, in Swedish and English, by the way. Okay, so all of this, isn't this just some kind of memory show and you just use these techniques and then you can demonstrate something but you don't really understand it, right? So if we look at this, you have data. It's just meaningless points, dots of something sitting there, ones and zeros. The next step, of course, is to make it into information. Information is something that can be deduced, something we can use, something that is shaping up to be a building block of something else. Information is what we memorize. That's where I come in. But that doesn't automatically translate into knowledge. But if you have information, if you internalize all those things, then you have the option to see how they're connected. You can quite literally connect the dots. And once the dots are connected, then we have the possibility of getting an insight, and that leads to the palace of wisdom. And if you don't watch out, well, you can end up there. So I think it's important to know things because then you can understand things. And it's also important to know that the boring things that you learn, I'm going to say this once more, you have the power to transform it into something that you want to think about instead of just reading it over and over again. Okay, so how confident are you? Because now we're going to test your memories. We'll see if we can make memory champions out of you before we are done. We have 18 more minutes to go. I will show you 30 images in 15 seconds. How many of you think you will have somewhere between 0 and 10 correct answers afterwards? That's the majority. How many think you will have 28 to 30? Almost everyone. You might blink, miss one, but the rest will be correct. There is an effect in psychology called the Rosenthal effect, and I have huge expectations on you. So this will increase your performance, and you will now do better. We'll see. So 15 seconds, and they start now. The only thing you need to do is to look at the screen. Here we go. That's it. Can we bring out some pens and papers so everyone can write? No, I'm just kidding. We're going to do this in a different way. It says 30 images, 30 memories, what do you remember? We'll do this as a test. So the only thing you need to do is to say up or down. But please say it not as loud as you can. I said this with a class sometimes, and then the other teacher in the door next to me came in and said, "What are you doing in this classroom?" We don't want the other lecturers coming back at us and being annoyed. But please, just as loud as you're comfortable, say up or down. That's correct. Perfect. Yes. Correct again. Very good. Perfect. That's good. That's a slight hesitation. Do you recognize the image below? Yes. There was, outside of the cinema, there was an image of me thinking about this duck. So that was kind of meant to throw you off your game, because I knew we'd be doing this a little bit later. We'll see if that comes back into play later on. But up was the correct answer. Perfect. Brazil. Good. Correct. Perfect. Oops. Perfect. That's good. Right again. Another one. Perfect. Brazil again. Perfect. Very good. Impressive. That's correct. Super good. Perfect. Yes. Good. Up, even though I tried to throw you off with the Tower of Pisa before. Yeah. Perfect. That's good. And that was the last one. That's 30 out of 30. At least for the vast majority of you. So, did it feel as hard as you thought from the beginning? Because it felt a little bit like cheating. And the problem with that is that we kind of mix recognition and recall up. When we talk about memory, we usually think about recall. Recalling something from the top of my head. That's how we take tests. That's what we do in school when we ask students to learn. But recognition is also part of memory, and it's vastly superior. Unfortunately, recall and recognition also gets mixed up when I'm studying as a student, or it did when I was 13, 14 years old, trying to do what David McDillan did, which is to learn chemistry. I looked at the page in the book, and I recognized it, so I thought I could it. I looked at it again, and I felt like I'm gonna pass the test. I didn't. But we are so good at recognition that it doesn't take us even a blink of an eye or a fraction of a second to recognize that's a bike. But if I asked you to draw a bike, it would probably look something like this. And there is the huge difference in recognition and recall. And I'm arguing that what I'm doing when I use my memory techniques and when I translate things and put them in a memory palace, as we like to call it, put things in different locations, I can close my eyes and think about the movie theater, and I don't even need to recall what was the first event. I can recognize that Putin was getting a can of maple syrup thrown at him. So when we can harness the power of recognition and get memories to not be the hard recall ones, but make them the easy recognition ones, then half of the battle is won. And when we then can also organize things into places, we don't need to, I call it just wishful thinking kind of memories. That's the natural memory. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. I can ask you what the capital of Sweden is, and we're in it right now. And hopefully you will say, oh, Stockholm. That's the correct answer, by the way. But why did Stockholm pop up? How did Stockholm pop up? And what are you going to do if you can't find Stockholm? I know that in my artificial memory, in what my kids call, use your other memory, Dad, I will look at the right shelf, the right cupboard, and when I go shopping, I put the socks in my drawer, I put the flour in my kitchen, and I've put the toothpaste in the cabinet in the bathroom. And that is the trick with knowledge as well. Store the information where I can find it later on. And that is actually what I was doing when I learned the magazine, because I didn't learn that entire magazine in 4 hours verbatim, word for word. I couldn't say which word was on the 8th row and 3 paragraphs down or whatever. I did learn keywords, which is we shorten, we pack the information, and then we can unpack it and recall the important information. One thing that was cut though, and I use this in every presentation because I think it's important, because nobody saw it, I actually learned the entire crossword. But in order to learn the crossword, you have to solve the crossword. So I had, during my 4-hour train ride, 15 minutes to spare, and I solved half the crossword, and I did the rest on my way to the TV recording. And then I learned to memorize it. But then when they shut it, they said, yeah, we can't use that, because it wasn't filled in on the version they projected, and then no one will believe you. Okay, so I thought that was sad. Either way, I'm going to show you one more thing, which is this. That the reason, again, why this works, can you guess what the guy is called to the left? what is the guy to the right? He's a baker, and that's Mr. Baker. The reason why we can use these things is also because names, for certain, and I know all of your names, they don't really mean anything. But what I did was I translated your capital name, or the capital B in Baker, to a smaller case. So I know there was one person called Björn, for example, and then of course I thought about Björn, that's bear in Swedish, and then it's just imagining a bear running around. Not all names mean anything, but if we can use some part of the names meaning something that you can store, it's much easier to remember. We have more connections, and then they will form better, longer-lasting memories. There has been 7 minutes since you passed a test with flying colors with 30 images, and I want you to repeat what you just did before. Of course, the effect is bigger if I did it tomorrow or a week after, but we are running low on time. So which one was the correct one, left or right? Yes. However, do you recognize the image to the left? Because these two were the one that was opposite to each other, and you had to make a decision then and now which of the images is the one that you saw first. So you have seen both, you have seen them simultaneously, you have seen one of them 0.5 seconds longer. I told you that recognition is powerful. I can't even find the right way of expressing it. It's super powerful. Your brain didn't inform you, but it made a timestamp when it saw the image to the right and decided to not inform you that you have seen both pictures, but you have seen the one to the right 0.5 seconds longer. That's correct. Yes, still the duck. And the last one, yes. So even though I tried to throw you off your game, I found something that appeared in other versions, it still came out the right answer, even after an interval. All of this means that you can do other things. This isn't exactly the same memory technique that I've been using, but I wanted to say this before we end for today. Because this relates exactly to what you're doing probably with your students. And I know that when I went to school, this is the way that I studied. So this was an experiment that I did where they had an hour to study. And in this experiment, you could study, then 20 minutes more where you studied, and then for the third part of that hour, you studied as well. So a study hour. And then they compared that to another group of students who studied and studied, but for the third part of the hour, for the last 20 minutes, they were not allowed to study. They gave them a blank piece of paper. So we have one group who have been studying for the full hour, one group who studied for 2 parts of the hour, and then they were just given a blank paper where they wrote down everything. Which group do you think did best on the test afterwards? The second one? Yeah, that's a classical psychological trap, isn't it? It is better to study, people. You should study, study, study. It's much better than taking a blank piece of paper and trying to write something down, if you have the test 5 minutes later. The day after, things are quite the opposite. And if you look 1 week later, the effect is dramatically different. So if you are sitting there right before the exam, then it is good to just keep studying. However, that's why it's also counterintuitive to not study, because you get the effect when you try to look into how much you remember. But what happens after is not that you improve by writing down, it's that you forget less. And we always overestimate how little we will forget. We will forget much more than we think we will. But if you take a blank piece of paper, write it down, you practice on the connections, and then you will remember much more. As one last example, they did this with Spanish grammar, and it's been done in other ways as well. Here are the results of 1 week later. Either you just study on your words, or you get the blank piece of paper, now you know the results. But then they had one group that got 3 pieces of paper, which is write everything down, toss away the paper, get another paper, write everything down, toss that away, and get a 3rd piece of paper. And the results shows that you should write it down 3 times. If you have the stamina, if you can master it, it's not fun, but it will increase learning. So what I want to say, if you want to remember anything of this, rehearsal is key. But it's not rehearsing like we used to do it, just cramming it in, but you need to know when to repeat the information. You do it now, you learn something new, you want to keep it, you want to bear it with you, then you should think about it later on today. After that, you should think about it again tomorrow, the next week, the next month, and the next year. And 5 years from now, there's a huge chance you will actually remember what you were hoping to remember. So what I want to leave you with, before we have time for some questions, is don't forget about the blank piece of paper. It is an empty canvas, and that's where your memories will be put down, and then you will remember things for a longer time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. This will revolutionize my homework with my kids for my their French studies. Thank you very much. We'll put it in place tonight. Okay, so we have time for questions. Anybody want a question? Yep. I will run over here. Sorry. And please, as last time, introduce yourself a little, please.
I was going to introduce my table and see whether you can guess my name or not.
Which table are you sitting? Are you sitting at the right table?
No, I'm a migrant from table 30.
30?
Yes.
Hold on, let me ask, because that was where I had a problem the last time, because I thought that 27 and 28 was just the same one. So I'm guessing you're not Anna, you're not Annika. Are you Jen?
No.
There is Emma, there's Jeanette, there is Nina, and there's Shafag.
Yes.
That's you. Okay,
Yes.
nice to meet you.
Thank you. I'm Shafak from Baku, Azerbaijan. When you say Azerbaijan, you remember oil. When you say oil, you remember Azerbaijan, usually these days. Or this year, COP29, because this is where we're hosted.
Yeah.
My question is actually, are you concerned at all that with social media that have taken our lives, everything that you have talked about literally jeopardizes our ability whether we make an effort or not? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that any kind of technological advancement, of course, makes us question what happens with the old and how should we now be able to do anything. But I think it is scary, not just with social media, but the way we interact with screens in general. I know that there are brain scans of English professors that can't read literature in the same way that they used to do, because we break up our train of thought in a way that we are defenseless against it. And of course, then you can cry in panic, but I also think you should then think, what can I do to program my brain to have longer stretches of time where I actually try to concentrate and remain focused. So I don't think we can get back to a way that we used to be before screens, before the internet, and I don't think anyone really wants to do that either. But I think we need to find a middle road where you don't spend 8 hours in a row on TikTok watching 5-second clips, because your brain will get used to the smaller and smaller and smaller portions of entertainment. So I think it's time to be cautious, but there is also great reasons for optimism, because you can change your brain and you can actually train it to keep the attention for a longer span.
All right, one more question, the last one, unfortunately.
My name is Mizgin. I was wondering, I guess that you talk to your students about memorizing is one thing, but knowing is a different thing. So how do you talk to your students about, because we all know that some students just memorize something and then they...
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's a really good question, and I think that the step I take with my students is that I first introduce them to the concept of memorizing it. So then I can ask other questions that I can't prepare for. So that is the way that I kind of throw a curveball in their direction, because they know that if I just give them the assignment that they were hoping for, then they can just prearrange everything, and it's very neat for them. They are very highly motivated, the students that are in my classroom, but they are also then, I shouldn't say lazy, but they find a focused way and they go by it, and it's safe for them. So I know that they know a lot of stuff, but I need to challenge them then in the question. That is the important part.
All right, let's give a warm hand to Martin Nilsson. Impressive.